Okay, we're going to look at the New Deal, the first early part of it, and what Roosevelt does, the things that Roosevelt does to try to get us out of the Great Depression. So the election of 1932 has Franklin Roosevelt going up against Herbert Hoover. Roosevelt is the Democrat, Hoover's the Republican. Roosevelt is also known as FDR, so you could, anybody referring to Roosevelt might refer to him as, Franklin Roosevelt or FDR. Either one is something people say quite often. And Roosevelt wins. It's 1932. This is one of the worst years in the history of the United States from an economic standpoint. And the perception of Hoover doing nothing and just the sheer weight of the Depression brings down Herbert Hoover and makes him a one-term president, one of the few one-term presidents that we wind up having. We don't have another president lose a second term until we get to 1976. 1980, when Jimmy Carter doesn't get a second term. So that's how rare it is a lot of times. That's him shortly after he is him, 10 years later. Just kind of shows what the presidency does. All right. Now, what was the New Deal? Well, the New Deal is Roosevelt's plan to get us out of the Depression. Everything that Roosevelt does from an economic standpoint, those are New Deal policies. These are, it's all focused and centered around the New Deal and getting us out of the Depression. But two very important things to understand. The first is this creates a much larger federal government. The federal government grows significantly during Roosevelt's time in office, and the New Deal does that. It also has government taking on a much greater responsibility to the people. That direct relief, that direct aid that Hoover was against, Roosevelt significantly changes that and puts in place programs that still exist today, that people depend on today in a lot of cases. So the size of the government and the role of the government both change under FDR. And Roosevelt makes the first 100 days something that people talk about a lot. The first 100 days of a presidency are a real measure of what's going to happen, of the success of a president. A lot of times the first 100 days is a good indicator of that. And Roosevelt's the first one to kind of make that the standard, targeting certain things in that time. And you're going to hear a lot in the coming months about Trump and his first 100 days in office and what he's doing. And there will be after the first 100 days, there'll be a little bit of a, analysis of what's gone on and what's happened in his first 100 days in office. The objective of the New Deal. The objective was one of three things. The New Deal hoped to accomplish any New Deal program hoped to accomplish either relief, recovery, or reform. Relief, trying to help those that were in a bad situation, the unemployed, the destitute. Recovery were policies that we could use to shift us out of the Great Depression. And reform, fix things that can or were currently hurting the economy. Reform certain aspects of our economic system to make it so that it would work better in the future and there wouldn't be the massive failings to get down the line. So that's the whole point. Any New Deal program, it's going to fall under one of those three categories. Now, one of the things Roosevelt would do, and he does this very successfully, is he would give these fireside chats, and he'd speak on the radio to the people. And with so many people having a radio today, this was a real way for Roosevelt to talk directly to the American people. And they feel connected to the president in a way that nobody ever had before. This wasn't something that the American people were used to. And, as communication changes, we've seen presidents, some get it and they do the things that are necessary in order to make that happen. Whether it was, the presidents taking advantage in their campaigns of the internet. Obama got a lot of credit, especially in his election in 2008, for using social media like Twitter and Facebook and really kind of grasping those social media aspects that existed in order to connect with the American voter. And Obama gets a lot of credit for that. So one of the first things Roosevelt fixed, actually the first thing Roosevelt looks to fix, is banking. And he passes the Emergency Banking Relief Act. This is the very first thing that Roosevelt does in his presidency. And what this did is it created what was known as a bank holiday, and all banks were to be closed and inspected. Because of the massive amount of bank failures, they were trying to figure out a way to prevent this from happening anymore, seeing if they could fix some of these issues. So government inspectors went in on the given day that they decided the bank holiday was going to be on. And if the bank was sound, meaning that it had the money, it didn't, the investors and those that had savings accounts, they didn't have to worry about losing all their money or the bank closing, they would remain open. And unsound banks, they would either remain closed or they would possibly receive some type of loan in order to keep them going, to remain safe and remain sound, and or at least get them in that direction. So all of this was an effort to restore confidence in the banks, to get people to feel like they would want to put their money there. And certainly, if you were an investor and somebody or you had money in the bank, and after the inspection your bank stayed open and there was no issue with it, you'd feel confident about your money being there. And hopefully, and the idea is to get more people to put money in savings accounts. If people don't put money in savings accounts, banks can't really loan money. If banks can't loan money, we can't get that money going in circulation. We can't grow the economy, or it becomes much more difficult to do that. Now, the other thing it did with, and this is related to banking and finance, is they passed the Glass-Steagall Act. And this forced banks to be more cautious with their money, and it also created the FDIC. This was repealed in the 1990s. Some people refer to this as part of the problem with why we had the housing market collapse, because the Glass-Steagall Act was taken away. That was under Bill Clinton. Trump has talked about creating a second Glass-Steagall Act to kind of reinstate some of the things that went away that led to the housing market collapse. We'll see if that happens, or if something comes in worse or better. But the FDIC was also a way to get people to feel comfortable with putting their money in the bank. The FDIC stands for Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and this is the federal government guaranteeing and backing everyone's money in the bank, everyone's individual bank account, up to a certain dollar amount. I think today it might be 150,000 or 250,000. Anyone that has $100,000 in their bank account, if the bank fails, you will get your money. Your money will not disappear. You will at least get your money back up to that point. Now, if you have 10 million in an account and the bank fails, you're only guaranteed up to a certain amount. But a lot of people that do that, they have separate insurance on their money and things like that. The FDIC was another step and get people to trust the banking system again. The Federal Securities Act. The Federal Securities Act, it made corporations disclose accurate information on their company. With the stock market crash, so much of what led people to buy certain stocks was a lot of false information that was being attributed out there. A lot of people putting out certain information about companies not being honest with what they were doing. And if you're going to open up your shares to the public, you need to be honest to the public about what's going on in your company, so people can make decisions and they don't make bad decisions because companies are hiding information. If they do that, they get in a lot of trouble. The Federal Securities Act also establishes the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is known as the SEC. Still exists today. And it's an agency. They regulate and they monitor things happening within the stock market. And some other economic things in general. But the SEC, they make sure that that companies that offer publicly traded stock, that those companies are being honest, that people are being honest in there. These are the guys that go after those with insider trading and deals like that. Now, when it came to farming, Roosevelt passes the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or the AAA. And this paid farmers not to grow crops on some of their land. So the federal government paid farmers not to grow crops. Uh, Pigs were slaughtered and not sold. No meat was taken from it. They were killed and just left to die. Crops were plowed under. Crops that were potentially going to be grown are just left away. So, and all of this is an effort because of the overproduction in the farming sector. This is all an effort to get the overproduction down, to bring the number, of those crops down, and raise the price of crops so the farmers make money. Now, this gets a lot of criticism because people, why would you just get rid of food and plow under food and slaughter pigs that could be used, and they dump millions of gallons of milk and things like that as well, all in an effort to bring down the supply and raise the price. But people were struggling to make ends meet because of the depression, and they're trying to make food more expensive or most basic needs. So the AAA wasn't without its criticism, and it actually gets struck down by the Supreme Court. We'll talk about that later in the week. But like I said, the whole goal is to decrease production and increase the price of crops. That's why the AAA was passed. Now, one of several programs that Roosevelt passes, very similar to this, and this is the first one, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. When I talk about what this is, this kind of idea gets repeated over and over again in different types of programs that are passed through the New Deal. The CCC had men between the ages of 18 and 25. They were paid to rebuild roads, parks, and other projects. They were given $30 a week. 25 of it was sent home. And they were provided food, clothing, and shelter. So here was a way, somebody down on their luck, if they got into this program, they got a little bit of money for them. They got to send money home. It was only for the young, and they were given their basic needs. They were given a little bit of money, and they were also, kind of able to take a little pride in their work and things like that. But this program becomes very time and again. The National Industrial Recovery Act, the NIRA, it just gave money to states to create jobs. You guys know what you need. Here you go. Here's some money. Make some jobs happen. The CWA, the Civil Works Administration, it provided 4 million jobs to build schools, pay teachers' salaries, things of that nature. So you kind of see in that CWA and the CCC, they're very similar, with a few different, wrinkles between the two of them. But basically, the idea is, here's government money, to build things, to pay people, to keep certain things going. But all of this creates deficit spending. And deficit spending is when the government spends significantly more than it takes in. And this is really the start of making this happen, and not really reversing this trend for a long, even still today. The deficit is an issue. And that was one of the criticisms of the New Deal, but everybody kind of doing what he did in a lot of ways. So there was a lot of issues when it came to that type of government spending. But these are a ton of programs here that the government does, and the government spends a lot of money on this. And like I said, it significantly changes the role of the federal government.